Improve your English communication skills through writing and speaking. Learn to write the academic way. Author of the book, Writing Academic Papers, a simple and easy-to-follow guide for international students and a long-time online academic researcher and writer. E. F. Henry teaches academic writing for international students. E. F. Henry also teaches English as a second language through stories. As a fictionist, E. F. Henry believes in the power of stories not only in inculcating values to students, but also in the ease international learners acquire English communication skills through stories. Learn English through stories and learn how to write the academic way with E. F. Henry at Alberta Henry Academy. Alberta Henry Academy, your gateway to achieving your academic and career goals.
A deeper look into narratives. Stories, even fictional ones, are often based on real-life situations, and the writers often aim to show their observations through the narrations that they want to portray. Since family is a society which is very common to all peoples, it has become one of the central themes of most stories. Such stories do not simply let readers have an inside look on what is happening in one household or another, but they also reflect what can be seldom discussed outside the house. Every family has issues to confront, but some are just simply common embarrassments, so that they are rather hidden from the public eye. Nevertheless, the causes, the envy and emotions, may be just as true to anybody, so that the narrations are not only used to inform, but also to send a message to the readers. In this discussion, I will present two fictional stories which portray the family through the author's unique styles. Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour, and Guy de Maupassant's The Necklace, will be compared and contrasted regarding the form, perspective, subject matter, content and writing styles of the authors. The Story of an Hour is about a woman's marriage to a working-class man who was reported to have been involved in an accident. Having frail health, her loved ones tried to break the news tactfully to her, and when she cried and locked herself in her room, they thought that she might have just been overwhelmed with the grief the news has brought along. However, they did not know that the female character was in fact relieved or perhaps even happy about the death of her husband, because finally, she will be free. She will not only be free physically to do the things she wanted to do and go to places she wanted to visit, but she will also be psychologically and emotionally free from all the demands of marriage at a time when women are supposed to do nothing but attend to household chores and the needs of the family. The woman then dreamt of the places she will be going to and the enjoyments she will discover as she lives her life as a widow. Nevertheless, little did she know that there will be a turn of events that will not make her see another day. When she finally came out of her room to wait for the expected dead body of her husband, the husband comes home all well and alive. The woman fainted at the sight of him, and the doctor declared her to have died because of extreme happiness upon seeing that her husband is alive. Chopin, 1894. The Necklace tells the story of a husband who had a very ambitious wife. Since the woman was beautiful but was unluckily poor, she got married to a working man. Unfortunately, the woman was never content with what her husband brought to her. Instead, she often dreamt about the good life, of dainty dishes, clothes and parties. To show his love and concern toward his wife, the husband once brought an invitation to a ball for him and his wife. However, contrary to his expectations, the wife felt angry about the invitation. Therefore, the man asked about her reaction only to know that she was thinking about the impossibility of her joining the ball without any appropriate dress. The husband sacrificed his savings for the dress, but the woman was still not content without a jewelry. The husband suggested her to borrow from a friend, which the wife did. The wife enjoyed the ball until morning while the husband was made to wait for her in a deserted anteroom. Unluckily, she soon discovered that the borrowed jewelry got lost. Consequently, the couple had to buy a new one to replace the borrowed jewelry. Therefore, they had to live more simply, getting rid of their helper and living in a small rented space. The wife had to work hard to help her husband pay the expensive jewelry. Years after, the wife came across her old friend. Looking old and impoverished, her friend did not recognize her until she introduced herself. Eventually, she had to confess to her friend about the jewelry, only to find out that the borrowed necklace that she lost and replaced was actually fake. Maupassant, 1907. The aforementioned literary works take the form of narratives. They tell different stories with similar themes, concentrating on what happens behind closed doors within the family members. They are both told by third-person narrators. Chopin's storyteller is omniscient, which means that the narration is not only based from what is observed by the naked eye, but the narrator feels free to speak about what might be going on in the mind of the character. For instance, when Mrs. Mallard was inside her room all alone, she is not only pictured by her actions but is also described with the thoughts that she is considering. Moreover, the storyteller talks about her feelings as if she personally knows how the character feels. The narrator did not limit herself to the bounds of the setting, but as an omniscient spectator, she follows the main character inside the room and talks about her as if she is there alone with the protagonist, able to read her every move, feeling and thought. On the contrary, Maupassant's speaker is limited because he bases the narration from the actions and descriptions which can be seen, and the speeches that the characters verbalize. The storyteller does not tell things that cannot be observed, such as thoughts and feelings. In contrast to Chopin's omniscient description, such as, "She did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held her." A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. Maupassant is rather objective. He tells the story by simply describing what is happening and quoting what is said. He never assumed what the character might be thinking about, nor did he comment on how one feels, unless it is physically expressed. For instance, picturing Mrs. Loisel, who was borrowing an adored necklace from her friend, Maupassant writes, "Then she asked, hesitating, filled with anguish, 'Can you lend me that?' Only that?" The author describes his character as filled with anguish, but such judgment is not based from an unexpressed emotion. Rather, the feeling is shown all over her face and her actions, so that the author is simply being descriptive as opposed to the omniscient description used by Chopin's storyteller. Consequently, Chopin's story sounds subjective and therefore has a greater impact in the mind and emotions of the reader. On the contrary, Maupassant is quite subjective in his approach, so that the story is told matter-of-factly. Nevertheless, the impact made by the second narrative is still great. As both authors used story as their form of literary device of expressing their thoughts and ideas, they do not sound very sermonic, despite the fact that they were obviously written to teach moral lessons to the readers. The first thing that is obviously noticeable in the two aforementioned narratives is that they both relate the stories of a husband and wife. However, the first is written by a female and the second, a male writer, so that the presentations of characters and circumstances are quite different. Firstly, the story of An Hour reflects the emotional and psychological abuse committed against females. It has feminist viewpoints that portray how women are treated unjustly because of what the society dictates. The story reveals that Mr. Mallard never hurt his wife physically, and that he was a loving husband. However, the wife was not satisfied with her role as a housewife who was bound nowhere else but the home, the household chores and the service to her husband. She was not the kind of woman who could be content with what people expect her to be. She is independent in her thinking, but she is unfortunately imprisoned within the bounds of norms and mores. Therefore, although there is no physical abuse, the protagonist has suffered emotionally and psychologically. On the other hand, Maupassant also presents the female character, Mrs. Loisel, as wanting and desiring just like Mrs. Mallard. However, Mrs. Loisel's wants and desires are achieved through psychological and emotional manipulation, in contrast to Mrs. Mallard's suppressed reactions and never achieved dreams. This makes Mrs. Loisel to be viewed as a protagonist who portrays negative characteristics and is seen as the abusive party in the husband and wife relationship. One could perhaps suspect that naturally, as a female writer, Chopin used the woman character of her story as the abused, while Maupassant used his female character as the abusive partner. The presentations could be said to be subjective, considering that the genders the authors represent are portrayed as the abused or rather passive characters. Although there is no evidence that the authors are subjective, it could perhaps be safe enough to assume so, especially that, when one looks at the work of Maupassant and compare it with Chopin's story, the characters of their own gender, are rather considered as the better characters. Nevertheless, this perhaps is not just a matter of defending the male or female characters, but the point being made here is the differences in the male and female perspectives of writers. Whichever the case may be, both authors present likely factual circumstances which are stark similarities in the aforementioned narratives. As Maupassant is described by the literary critic and author, Edgar Roberts, he, Maupassant, reflects his character as a meticulous writer, devoting much attention to the reality of everyday existence so that he is considered a naturalist writer. Chopin obviously shares such description because she based her story as well from realistic situations. With regards to length of time, Chopin's The Story of an Hour narrates what happens in the last hour of the protagonist's life, holding true to the title. The said narrative was ingeniously crafted to subtly show the challenge there had been in containing the setting within an hour, and within the bounds of the home. In retrospect, such strategy gives more meaning and expression to what the author is trying to communicate through the story. The symbolism used in the story is not only seen in the words used, or the descriptions, but it is also present in the narrative style of the author. One of the issues presented in the story is the portrayal of the protagonist as an imprisoned wife. It is true that Mrs. Mallard is a free woman who is able to do whatever she wants to do, but the fact that she cannot just go anywhere she wants to, is already a representation of her limitations. As mentioned earlier, the time frame of the story is but an hour, and that, on one hand, portrays limitations. Secondly, the setting is just within the house. Although the activities outside the house were described while the woman was inside her room, she was only presented to have looked out the window, have a glimpse of what might be outside the house, and simply imagine what excitement there could be beyond the sounds and sights she can hear and see from her room. As it is already known, Mrs. Mallard never got to experience what she imagined in her room. She never really experienced how it was to be free, body and soul free, because she died within the hour. Thirdly, the title also initially suggests the time frame of the story, calling the attention of readers to it and relating it to the events in the narrative. Looking at the big picture, the short story is not simply telling a sad narrative, but it is also aiming to express the same meanings, the same picture of a woman being imprisoned by time and circumstances through different perspectives and contexts such as the time frame, setting and the title. The Necklace, on the other hand, extends its time frame by giving a little background of how the problem occurred, how it was resolved, and how the protagonist finally learned after 10 years that the borrowed necklace she had lost was a fake. Unlike Chopin, who seemed to be in a hurry to finish her story within an hour, Maupassant took the freedom to extend his time frame to 10 years. As if the woman committed a terrible crime of wanting to have beautiful things, Maupassant seemed to have punished his protagonist by making her suffer for 10 years, working hard in order to pay off the jewelry that she replaced the lost necklace with. As though the 10 years of hard labor were not enough, Mrs. Loisel still was given a more grievous sanction when she finally met her lender, who was still looking young and beautiful, in full contrast to how old and unattractive she already looked. Then, she also learned that the necklace that caused all her grief and sorrows was nothing but a fake. One similarity that could also be contrasted in the styles of the two authors is the use of imagination of the main characters. Chopin's Mrs. Mallard consumed almost half of the time and space of the story contemplating what she might do on her own. She imagines about her future life as she thinks about her freedom. She looks forward to what she can enjoy once she buries her unfortunate husband who was killed in the accident. On the contrary, Maupassant gives a short space describing Mrs. Loisel sitting down and thinking about that night which has caused her all her problems. She looks back to what has been, while Mrs. Mallard looks to what might be. She remembers her past and is made miserable, while the former thinks about her future, and she is exultant about it. The comparisons and contrasts that have been pointed out earlier did not simply bring out the similarities and differences of the narratives, as well as the writing styles of the authors. Rather, they actually help readers to understand the stories more clearly, and to look at them through another point of view. They also help readers comprehend even further about symbolisms, subject matter, forms, perspectives, content and style. In the aforementioned literary works, the narrative form has been considered by the writers as their best way of expressing their thoughts and ideas. Chopin and Maupassant have approached their narratives using a third-person storyteller. However, Chopin used an omniscient narrator who talks about the feelings and thoughts of the main character, while Maupassant used a limited speaker, who comments only on what is observed and interpreted through the naked eye. The subject matters are similar. It is perhaps important as well to consider the gender of the authors, since the stories talk about family affairs, specifically on husband and wife relationships. It is obvious how the two storytellers differ in the presentation of characters because Chopin portrays her protagonist as a psychologically and mentally abused wife. Maupassant, on the other hand, presents his main character as a demanding and manipulative spoiled brat, who makes her husband suffer with her, the consequences of her unreasonable wants. The writing styles of the two authors were uniquely different, complementing their approaches to telling their stories. Chopin used various contexts to magnify her point while Maupassant used his character's circumstances to make clear the lessons he wanted to share. Social issues involving families and gender have long been silenced because of the strong patriarchal principles which were ingrained in the minds of people all across cultures. With the current advocacies related to such issues, we are now learning to come out in the open and talk about these things. However, there are still a lot of people who frown on such advocacies. The grievous part of the matter is that advocates are put in dangerous positions where unnecessary threats and nasty comments are thrown at them. This is the reason why, as an advocate, I love to use stories to bring forward my thoughts and ideas, to educate and empower the weak, and to support and develop skills of the oppressed as their way out from their depraved circumstances. Additionally, stories that we can always relate to are always excellent materials in improving not only our reading skills but also our English communication skills. So, let's learn English through stories here at Alberta Henry Academy. For paid lessons which are designed to make learning English through stories more interesting and easy, please visit albertahenryacademy.com. See you there.